Welcome to day 3 of our Exploring Flexibility and Mobility series. Today we're going over a couple of exercises to build mobility and explore our range of motion in our shoulders. Alright guys, our first exercise today is going to be a test of our shoulder flexion. So this is the ability of our shoulders to fully come up and over and then get that nice extension overhead. So to do this, you can kind of place yourself up against the wall, kind of feet about a few inches from the wall. We want to put our backs flat against the wall. You'll notice that your lumbar spine probably won't necessarily touch the wall because of the natural curvature of the spine. So don't necessarily try to push your lower back into the wall. But you want to think about having your shoulder blades on the wall and then knitting your ribs in. So when I mean about knitting your ribs in, it's like deep inhale, they kind of flare out, and then exhale, knit them in, so kind of lengthening your ribs down. So we want to think about keeping those ribs down. We want to bring our arms out. We want to think about keeping our elbows straight and our thumbs kind of pointed upwards towards the ceiling. And we're just going to raise our arms up, keeping the elbows from bending. We want to think about keeping our ribs down and not flaring the back. And the test here is to see if you can touch your thumbs to the wall. So now I can do this, but you'll notice my ribs kind of flare out because I have limited range of motion in my shoulders. And some of you may notice you have this too. So one way that you'll notice you'll have it is if you start to kind of compensate with your back, which is what you don't want to do. We want to think about keeping it tucked, but that's the way some people will kind of use it to try to get that overhead flexion. So if you find you're doing this, that means you have limited range of motion in your shoulders. Another way you'll notice you have limited range of motion if you bend your elbows to achieve that thumb to wall touch. Again, that also means limited range. We don't want to do that. And then simply if you can't touch the wall at all. So I'll show you an exercise that you can kind of do daily to help with this. So if you found yourself not able to touch your thumbs to the wall without compensating in other areas in our last exercise, I'll show you a way that you can kind of work on opening up and getting that full flexion of the shoulders and overhead extension. And one way to do that is in a common yoga posture, which is downward facing dog. So we plant our hands on the mat, tuck our toes under, and kind of push our hips up and back. And in downward facing dog, we want to think about putting our weight more towards our hips than in our wrists. One way to do this is to obviously send your weight back and feel like you're lengthening your tailbone back and up. But another way is to place your weight in the index finger mound of your hands. So you're not dumping it into your wrists, you're dumping it more into your hands and that palm area. That can kind of help minimize wrist injury and wrist strain and any pain that might be associated with this posture. So when we get into downward facing dog, we want to think about lengthening through the spine. So if you need to bend your knees, that's totally okay because this is not a hamstring stretch. This is more about lengthening through the spine. But we are not necessarily focusing on that today, so just find a comfortable posture that feels good. And we're going to do what we call a tricep wrap. So we are going to bow our elbows out and then wrap them under and back. So do you see how I did that? Bow them out and then wrap them under. And when you do that, you'll find broadness through the shoulder blades, which is what we want to find here. So bow and wrap. So you'll find that. And from this posture, we are going to kind of shift our weight into our left hand. And then see if you can bring your right arm up so our thumb is towards the ceiling. And all we're going to do here is see if you can hover it over the mat. Say about about 5 breaths at a time. And just hover. And that kind of works our overhead extension that we need. You do this on both sides. Again, placing your weight in your index finger mound so you're not pushing it into your wrists. And back. Think about keeping the elbow straight when you do this. If this is too uncomfortable for you, you can also drop into child's pose. So sending your sit bones back towards your heels, lengthening your arms up and out, and resting your frontal lobe on the mat. So think about getting a nice stretch. So pulling and lengthening our arms that way, or like towards the front of our mats as we lengthen our tailbone back to find the length through the body and feel that nice stretch through the lat muscles. And you can do the exact same thing here, only this time with both muscles if you want, which is see if you can lift them off the mat. And you can get a little more of a stronger stretch in this one. So I really encourage the child's pose as well if you're not quite comfortable with the downward facing dog stretch. You just lift thumbs forward. Elbows as straight as you can get them. And this really works that range of motion in the shoulders. Again, coordinating your movements with your breath will really help with this exercise. Alright guys, so the next exercise we're going to be doing for shoulder mobility is scapular protractions and retractions. So our scapula is another fancy word for our shoulder blades. So for this motion, we want to really isolate the movement in our shoulder blades. So we'll put our arms up, thumbs towards the ceiling, and we're just going to isolate the movement in our shoulder blades. So a protraction is widening our shoulder blades, which kind of pulls our arms forward, and then scapular retraction is squeezing our shoulder blades together. And kind of this will widen out your arms a bit. So you want to think about keeping your elbows straight, your arms straight, and really leading the motion with our shoulders. So we get this motion in yoga when we do postures such as cat-cow, and then also really active plank exercises is another way we do this exercise. But this really just isolates the movement of the shoulder blades. And something we kind of just don't take the time to do in our everyday activities. So now we're going to add an internal rotation of our shoulders. So feel free to do this about 10 to 15 times. And after you do this, we're going to add an internal rotation. So we're going to start in neutral. We're going to protract our shoulder blades. And we're just going to do one at a time. Bring our arm out and around and down, and then bend that elbow. You'll notice my shoulders internally rotating as I do that. Bend that elbow back and see if you can touch the opposite shoulder blade. We're not like crawling our hand up our back here. We're just simply bringing it down and around and seeing if you can just touch it. That's all we're doing. If you can't, that means you have a little less internal rotation of your shoulder, and that's okay. We're not trying to strain it in any way. And then retract again, protract, bring it down and around, internally rotate that shoulder, bend that elbow to tap the shoulder blade, bring it back, down and around, into protraction, and retract again. Protract, down and around. These are nice and controlled movements, so we're not we're not rushing this process. And then retract, using that shoulder blade again, not using your arm, using your shoulder blade to go through. And then you would do that on the other side. So protract, bring it down and around, Bend that elbow, see if you can tap that shoulder blade. I have less internal rotation with my right arm than my left because I use my left arm to scratch my upper back a lot of times. I don't use my right arm, so you can see it's like way less internal rotation. So that's good. So that means I maybe have to practice a little more. So we protract and then we retract as we bring it back. Protract again, bring it down and around, bend that elbow, tap as far as you can towards the shoulder blade without inching your hand up or back. Bring it back, bring it down and around to protraction and then retraction. And then you do that about 10 times on either side. You can either alternate or do 10 on one side and then 10 on the other. And that's just really opening up and showing your internal rotation ability with your shoulders. So if you find that you're struggling with shoulder internal rotation, one way to kind of help with that is to kind of lay on your back. And I usually will keep my knees like lifted. It doesn't really matter necessarily, but you want to bring your hands under like your sit bones kind of, so your weight is on your hands, and then you want to think about pushing your shoulder blades into the ground, so actively like resting them into the ground, and then just leading the movement with your elbows. So you want to think about seeing if you can just lift your elbows off the ground and then back down. And this helps work the internal rotation of your shoulders. So you really want to isolate this movement. See if you can just like lift your elbows up. Keeping your shoulder blades on the mat if you can. It's a very like controlled and small movement. And then release back down. All right, and for our last exercise, exploring shoulder mobility, we are going to be looking at shoulder external rotation. So to do this, you can kind of use like a corner or edge of a wall, and we're just going to kind of cactus our arm out and kind of make our body level with the wall. And we want to think about pushing our arm into the wall, so kind of pushing our chest forward and pushing our elbow and arm into the wall. And when you do this, you'll notice you're not only getting a nice stretch through the pectoral muscles, through the chest, but you're also getting external rotation of their shoulders. So instead of like internal rotation, you're opening up the shoulder, and you can just kind of use your body weight to kind of help you push into the wall. And from here, you can see if you can lift your hand off the wall. And this helps kind of isolate the movement and really feel that stretch through the shoulder. And that helps with external rotation. So lift the hand off the wall and just kind of hover it there for a few seconds, for a few breaths. And then release it back down, still pushing that elbow into the wall. And then back up. And then release back down, and then back up. So a super simple stretch to kind of help open up and find a little more external rotation in your shoulders. And then you can just repeat that on the other side, and you are good to go. So thank you guys for joining me for day 3 of our Exploring Flexibility and Mobility series. Tomorrow, day 4, we are going to be exploring the upper back, and that will also incorporate a bunch of shoulder movements too, because like we talked about, everything in the body is related. So we're going to be talking about a little spinal mobility tomorrow, and I hope you guys can join us. All right, thank you. See you tomorrow.